July 1944. The Italian sun beat down on Ramitelli airfield as waves of heat danced over the runway. Engines rumbled in the distance. Dust drifted through the air like smoke. It was another day of war. In the air and on the ground, American bombers prepared for yet another strike deep into Nazi territory. But something different was happening. Flying escort were squadrons of P-51 Mustangs, sleek, fast, deadly, and painted on their tails was a defiant stripe of crimson red. The Red Tails. To the men who flew them, it was a mark of pride. To many in the American military, it was still a subject of skepticism. And to the Germans, it was laughable. In a Luftwaffe intelligence center, captured reconnaissance photos were passed between officers. One pointed at the red-tailed fighters and scoffed. "Negro pilots?" he said with a smirk. "The Americans must be running out of men." His colleague chuckled, brushing it off with a sneer. "Let them fly. They'll fall just like the rest." To them, the Red Tails were a joke, nothing more than propaganda on wings, inexperienced, inferior, disposable. What they didn't know was that those very wings would soon become the sharpest blade in the Allied arsenal, that in the skies they believed they owned, they were about to be hunted, and that within weeks the laughing would stop, replaced by the thunder of 8 machine guns and the fire of over 100 downed German planes. Because that summer, the Luftwaffe didn't just face a new enemy, they faced an enemy they never believed could exist, and their failure to see it would cost them everything. The story of the Red Tails didn't begin in the skies over Europe. It began in a segregated classroom in Tuskegee, Alabama. Long before they earned their call signs or flew their first combat sortie, these men were told, in no uncertain terms, that they did not belong. They were black. They were soldiers, but they were not, in the eyes of many, pilots. Military brass debated their very existence. Internal memos questioned their intellect, their reflexes, their courage. One Army Air Corps general even wrote, "Negroes are mentally inferior to the white man. They lack the courage and initiative to fly in combat." Still, they trained. They trained under broken aircraft, worn-out gear, and suffocating doubt. They studied aerodynamics and ballistics harder than anyone because failure wasn't just personal, it was collective. A single mistake would be used as proof that they never should have flown at all. Their first planes were hand-me-downs, aging P-40 Warhawks, too slow for dogfights and too fragile for long-range escort. They lacked range. They lacked protection. Some said they lacked purpose. Early mock combat trials were brutal. Engines failed. Maneuvers fell apart. One instructor said of the Tuskegee cadets, "They fly like they're afraid of the sky." Critics within the military called the program a political stunt. "Window dressing," one colonel muttered. "We need killers, not an experiment." And yet, the experiment refused to die. Through crashes and casualties, through red tape and ridicule, the Tuskegee Airmen endured. Because while the planes were falling apart, the men inside them were being forged by fire, by pressure, by purpose. By 1943, the 332nd Fighter Group was born. They were still untested, still doubted, but behind those red tails was something the war machine hadn't expected. Discipline, precision, rage, controlled and sharpened like steel. No one imagined that this small, segregated unit, dismissed as a PR gesture, would soon fly the most advanced American fighters in the arsenal. Or that buried beneath ridicule and racism was the seed of something far deadlier than anyone had dared to imagine. A monster, and it was almost ready to fly. Their first missions weren't glamorous. Flying outdated P-40s, the Tuskegee Airmen were assigned ground attack roles in North Africa, strafing convoys, bombing supply lines, and watching their kill tallies go unnoticed in official reports. They weren't protecting bombers. They weren't dogfighting German aces. They were proving they could be trusted to fly, not to win. Radio chatter from white squadrons often excluded them. Intelligence briefings were given to others first, if at all. In mess halls and command tents, their presence was tolerated, not welcomed. And when they finally received escort assignments, the doubts came louder. "We're sending colored pilots to cover us?" One B-17 commander reportedly asked, "Who's going to cover them?" On July 2, 1943, the 99th Fighter Squadron took part in their first bomber escort mission over southern Italy. The Luftwaffe was waiting. The P-40s were too slow to keep pace with the bombers, and they lacked the altitude ceiling to meet German fighters head-on. In minutes, the formation was scattered. One Tuskegee pilot, Second Lieutenant Sherman White, was shot down. His wingman, Second Lieutenant James McCullen, disappeared into a cloud bank and was never seen again. After the mission, the official report was damning. Unit failed to provide adequate protection. Engagement resulted in loss of bombers and fighters. Recommend reassignment to secondary roles. The press barely noticed, but inside the military, the murmurs grew louder. They're a liability. We gave them a chance. They just can't handle it. And perhaps most crushing of all, the criticism didn't just come from outside. Within their own ranks, some began to question the mission, the dream, the cost of representation in a war that still didn't see them as equals. But defeat did something strange to the Tuskegee Airmen. It didn't break them. It sharpened them. Each failure became a data point, every funeral a vow. They studied German flight patterns, learned to fly tighter, shoot straighter, think faster. They drilled day and night until formation flying became second nature and every maneuver was instinct. Because if they were going to die, they would not die as a footnote. They would die as proof. And what no one realized, not the generals, not the journalists, not even the Luftwaffe, was that those failures weren't the end of the story. They were just the beginning. It didn't happen in a single mission. No thunderclap of victory. No parade. The turning point crept in quietly, like a change in wind. A shift in the tone of radio calls. A silence on the Luftwaffe's frequency where arrogance once roared. It began when the Tuskegee Airmen were finally given something they'd never truly had: trust. In early 1944, the 33rd Fighter Group received new P-51 Mustangs, sleek, fast, long-range killers. No more cast-off planes, no more excuses. These were frontline fighters, and the mission was clear. Escort the bombers, bring 'em home. No diversions, no chasing kills. Just protect the heavies, no matter what. At first, even the bomber crews had their doubts. They saw the red tails and remembered the headlines. Experimental unit, Negro pilots, unproven. But mission after mission, something strange happened. The bombers they escorted stopped dying. Over Italy, over Austria, over Germany. Formation after formation returned intact, their gunners shocked by the discipline of the red-tailed fighters weaving through the skies above them. Reports came in. The red tails never left us. No matter what came at us, they were there. Best damn escort we've ever had. While other fighter groups broke off to chase kills, the 33rd Fighters stuck to their bombers like armor-plated shadows. They weren't chasing glory, they were rewriting doctrine. Behind the scenes, German analysts took note. Luftwaffe commanders reviewed combat logs and began to ask, who are these pilots with crimson tails? Why do our FW-190s keep failing to break their lines? And still, no one in command seemed to notice. But the whisper had begun, among B-17 crews, among bomber wings, among the men who actually flew through hell and needed someone to watch their backs. The whisper said, request the red tails.
It wasn't official. It didn't need to be, because in war, survival speaks louder than prejudice. And that's how it happened. Not with a headline, not with applause, but with the slow erosion of doubt and the quiet, rising fear that the enemy might finally be outmatched.
By mid-1944, the Germans weren't laughing anymore. What began as a rumor, a colored unit flying long-range cover, was becoming a nightmare written in flak bursts and shattered Messerschmitts. Luftwaffe pilots had a name for them now, Die Roten Schwanze, the Red Tails. They'd appear high above the bomber formations, small streaks of silver and red against the sun, silent at first until they struck. The Tuskegee Airmen didn't just defend, they hunted. With the range of the P-51 Mustang and the discipline of seasoned warriors, they began executing perfect intercepts. No breaks, no ego, no mercy. The numbers spoke louder than any propaganda. In just a single month, Luftwaffe squadrons suffered catastrophic losses. Over 100 planes, many veteran fighters, downed by a group the Reich once dismissed as a failed experiment. One German pilot, interviewed after the war, confessed, "We feared the Red Tails. They didn't dogfight, they destroyed." B-24 and B-17 crews were writing new legends in the air. When we saw the Red Tails above, we knew we'd live to see home. They didn't lose bombers. It was like they were made of fire and steel. Gun camera footage showed a pattern. While other fighter groups pursued kill counts, the Red Tails created kill zones. Tight, strategic, overwhelming. They didn't just win fights, they denied the enemy any chance to strike. Morale in the Luftwaffe fractured. Some German squadrons began aborting missions entirely when red-tailed Mustangs were spotted in the distance. Even elite units lost confidence. The myth of German air superiority, built on years of dominance, was burning down in the skies over Hungary, Poland, Austria. And yet, back in Allied command rooms, there was still hesitation to admit what was happening. Because the truth was uncomfortable. A group they had once sidelined, underfunded, doubted, and questioned, was now rewriting the laws of aerial warfare. One flight officer summarized it in a simple report. They don't miss. They don't break. They don't fail. Fear had changed sides. And now, every flash of red on a tail fin meant one thing to the enemy. The sky no longer belonged to them.
The Red Tails were never supposed to succeed. They were born from segregation, from a system that believed color defined competence. Their squadrons were carved out not from belief in their potential, but from political pressure, fear of criticism, and a sense of obligation rather than opportunity. But war, unlike bureaucracy, is honest. And in the crucible of combat, truth rises. When machines fail, when strategies collapse, only skill, resolve, and discipline survive. That was the doctrine the Red Tails brought to the skies. Not written in field manuals, but in every mission flown, every bomber protected, every enemy downed. They didn't just fly better, they flew with more to prove. And that created a new kind of power. While the Luftwaffe trusted in legacy, in bloodlines and tradition, the Tuskegee Airmen trusted in repetition, in training, in teamwork. Their superiority wasn't mythic, it was methodical. And slowly a new doctrine began to emerge. Power wasn't about fear, it was about reliability. Victory wasn't about pedigree, it was about preparation. And in the age of mechanized war, precision could outweigh prejudice. They embodied a uniquely American truth, that greatness doesn't come from what you're given, it comes from what you build. The Red Tails didn't ask to be symbols. They didn't carry ideology in their cockpits, only the weight of expectation. and the will to rise above it. But with every mission, they exposed the lie at the heart of Nazi racial supremacy and the quiet hypocrisy within their own country's ranks. The enemy flew for pride. The Red Tails flew for proof. And proof, in war, is more powerful than pride. Even German intelligence reports began acknowledging the difference. The red-tailed P-51s exhibit exceptional discipline and coordination. Attempts at baiting or distracting are ineffective. They weren't just fighting enemy fighters. They were rewriting the logic of air superiority. What began as an experiment had evolved into a doctrine, one that taught commanders, engineers, and nations a simple but devastating truth. The most dangerous weapon is not the one born from privilege. It's the one forged in doubt and sharpened by necessity.
They laughed when they saw them. Young black pilots in second-hand planes, flying under rules made to keep them grounded. They scoffed at the very idea that these men could protect bombers, outfly Germans, or even survive the skies of Europe. They were an experiment, a sideshow, a political compromise. But war does not care who you are, only what you do when the sky catches fire. And by the time the Red Tails had flown their final escort, the laughter was gone. In its place, silence and respect. German pilots who once taunted them began to avoid the red-tailed P-51s. Bomber crews who once doubted them now prayed to see crimson on the wings above. And generals who once questioned their orders now counted on their discipline to bring men home. In just 1 month, the Luftwaffe lost over 100 fighters trying to break through the Red Tail's screen. The so-called inferior pilots had become executioners of the Reich's last hopes. And when the final tallies were read, when kills were counted, losses recorded, and legends tallied, the numbers spoke louder than any slur ever hurled. They hadn't just proven themselves in battle. They had shattered the lie. Because the Tuskegee Airmen were never the experiment. The experiment was racism itself. And in the fire of war it failed. Their victories were not just over Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, but over every shadow that said they didn't belong. They flew with targets on their backs and still came home heroes. And in the wreckage of Nazi arrogance and the silence of shattered ideologies, one sound remained, the roar of the Red Tails, cutting through the clouds like a verdict. They were never meant to win, but they did, again and again, until no one could deny the truth anymore. They laughed when they saw them take off. They stopped laughing when they never came back.